I'm Kyle Malnati, your host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. At Calibrate, we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. My personal mission is to encourage, empower, and educate you by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. Our esteemed guest today, Carol Poore, Ph.D., MBA, two-time author. We're going to be talking about strategic impact. Carol was at one point the vice provost for Arizona State University. She's helped senior executives, emerging leaders, consultants, et cetera, lots of different people with strategic planning. One of the things I really enjoy about Carol is she's also in the real estate industry, and we'll talk about that a little bit. She also comes from a real estate family. So very cool topics for our Calibrate Real Estate Nation. Carol, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's going to be a great conversation, and I love to just dive right into the topic. So as I've been reading your book, Chapter 8 really spoke to me. It just sung to me. And for those that don't have a copy of the book quite yet, Chapter 8 is all about your strategic personal purpose for you, the vital curator. And I just love this, Carol, and it makes so much sense in a book about strategic planning that we can get our organizations right, but if we aren't entering the doors, the hallways of our organization with a personal purpose statement ourselves, it's going to be kind of flat, because if we're walking around not knowing what our personal mission is or our personal purpose, it makes it real difficult. And I highlighted this in Chapter 8 of your book. Your personal purpose statement can provide direction and clarity for all of your career investments, including where and how you choose to work, your volunteer community service, and your lifelong learning efforts. I think that when it comes to personal purpose, and I've gone through several exercises, this is a really difficult process, and you actually dive into why it's a difficult process. But as you work with people, what have you found that really is kind of the first hurdle or the issue for someone as they're trying to create a personal purpose? And what are some suggestions that you might have to sort of debunk some of just the, apathy around it, or concern or nervousness around like writing down a personal purpose?
That's a great question, Kyle. And personal purpose can relate so much on the bigger scale to strategic planning, with organizations or entrepreneurs having a vision statement, then a mission statement, and then corporate goals or personal goals. So there's a lot of parallel. And that's why I included that personal purpose is the last chapter of my strategic impact book. So to answer your question, I find that many people feel that there's a mantle that's been placed on them because of either other people's expectations or the fear of trying something new. There's a lot of fear of failure and fear of success that can be a kind of a blockage to prevent people from even thinking about their own personal purpose. And so in the book, I have 7 pivotal questions, and you read a couple of them. One of my favorite is, how would you like to be remembered many years from now? Another one is, what would you do now if there was no risk for failing? And what I encourage my audiences to do is just to have stream of conscious, write down ideas. It could be bullet points. If you're a sharp editor, it could be very succinct, but not to try to over wordsmith it. And then begin to look for themes in the answers, patterns, such as I like to, thrive on new ideas or entrepreneurial projects. Those kinds of things can help to shape that personal purpose. And I always encourage people not to try to wordsmith it perfectly, because they can reflect and refine it over time. My personal purpose statement, for example, is to be a thought leader, helping others find and fulfill their purpose. And it has taken me before the COVID time period, many plane rides where I'm doodling on a pad of paper, and I'm just answering these questions and seeing patterns and reflecting and refining. But that is a very succinct mission statement or personal purpose statement. And I've had it for a number of years, and it's applied to my work. It's applied to my role as a parent, being a thought leader. I will dry up and blow away if I'm told that I don't have opportunities to offer ideas, for example. I want to be a thought leader and I want to help others find and fulfill their purpose. So that's just a little bit about how to go about with a personal purpose, shaping it and not getting afraid that you have to have it perfect.
I love this exercise, and you went through a couple of the questions. My favorite question is, what are 2 times in recent years where you felt as if you were making a difference? That really made me pause as I was listening to that. I was like, wow. And then obviously, what do you want to be remembered by? What would you do if there were no risk of failing? What a great question, right? And that's one of those things, like take all the concerns away, take all the money away, just say, like, what would you do if there was no risk of failing? I also caught this, and you shared this a moment ago, that a personal purpose statement is a work in progress. We're never done, right? And it's constantly iterative. And that's what Calibrate is all about. It's iteration, and it's moving and making adjustments, and learning by people say failure, but I like to say having learning experiences, trial and error, and going through that. And in the book, in chapter 8, you share, if a leader is afraid of failure, it may result in sidestepping plans or conversations about the future. And then at the same time, you also share that sometimes people are fearful of failure, but then they're also a little bit fearful of success, which sounds a little bit strange. But you share with us that success requires change, and change alters the relationships around you. So that's the reason why some are afraid of success and the commitment that a personal purpose statement might require. So it's interesting to me that some people are almost, you hear like self-sabotage, right? I don't want to write a personal mission statement or a personal purpose statement because it's going to give me a compass and direction. And then if I'm not living that out, then I'm sort of like realizing that I'm not progressing towards that success. And isn't that funny? Because it's like, well, you either are or you aren't marching towards something. It's just so funny that people may be apprehensive just about success alone.
Absolutely. And I think we've all heard the statement that if you're not moving forward, if you're just standing still, you're actually moving backward, because the world changes whether or not you step forward. And that fear of success is a tricky one, because it might mean that a person puts a few more hours into each week to try to do something new or learn something new. It might be that they have to incorporate new mentors into their lives, which would in some way disrupt some of the social capital. It would increase their circle as opposed to keep it the same and the same people all the time. So success practices do require us to step up and to not be afraid of new, not be afraid of change.
It's great advice. And one of the things I like in chapter 8 is you bring up Jim Collins, author of Good to Great and many other books. And Jim reminds all of us in the Venn diagram that you share in your book is that you've got these 3 different circles, and where they all intersect is where kind of that beauty happens. And you've got, what are you deeply passionate about? Number 1. Number 2, what can you be the best in the world at? And then number 3, what drives your economic engine, which I think a lot of people forget. So good reminders. If you haven't read Good to Great, obviously we want everybody to pick up Strategic Impact. And we're going to talk about a giveaway that we are going to be doing thanks to Greenleaf Book Group, that your publisher. But let's skip to chapter 7, the chapter before chapter 8. I thought it would be great to start with the personal purpose, because so many of the people, so many of our Calibrate crew, our Calibrate Nation are real estate practitioners. They're driving in their car. They're going from appointment to appointment. And, I think it's important to make sure that we've calibrated the person. But now, as people will get maybe into a point where they're a team leader, or maybe like me, they're operating a boutique brokerage firm or a larger organization, let's talk about communicating, celebrating, and engaging employees. I think that is something that doesn't happen well. And it doesn't happen in big organizations. It doesn't happen in small organizations. People forget to do this well. So I've got a few things that I highlighted, and then I'll just, ask you questions here and there, Carol, if you're ready. So organizational goals are achieved, communicated, and celebrated. That's when it's, really having good impact, and we're having good strategic impact. And it's vital when those things happen. Um, I think it's important, and you've shared this too, that when you see how different employees have accomplishments that contribute to their organizational success, that's vital to them to feel like they're a part of moving something forward. And it creates goal momentum in a positive feedback loop. So what are some best practices here in communication and making sure that everyone's on board? Like Jim Collins says, you've got everybody in the right seats on the bus, and the bus is now moving forward to that desired destination.
Absolutely. Well, Kyle, it might be helpful to just remind our audience that strategic impact is really about a very comprehensive but customizable model, especially tailored to the 98% of firms out there that are small businesses across the world. And just a reminder about what strategic planning is, it's really a management process that envisions a future and develops strategies to achieve that future. For example, Target, we've seen Target has revenue goals, but their strategy in the last few years that was absolutely brilliant, coming from strategic planning, no doubt, was that they had created this drive-up program. And this was before the pandemic. But when the pandemic hit, they ramped up that drive-up program, and they've made millions of dollars in revenue they wouldn't have otherwise had. And the drive up was the strategy, the how, but certainly they had a revenue goal. So strategic planning is all about a process that helps an organization, or if it's a personal strategic plan, get to a desired future. So my model is to really break that down. What's the process? It's an amazing strategic planning workshop if you're a business. And I call that the shared experience of bringing people together. The second is having a written strategic plan, and more companies are putting this out in digital forms, like on the website, and using key messages and social media for corporate social responsibility and where they want to go that inspire their stakeholders. And then the third part is what you were just talking about, the system for tracking the results, which very frequently does not get done. Once the strategic plan is finished, many companies fail to actually break out those goals and say, okay, we have 3-year goals. What are we going to get done for the next 12 months? What's the annual operating plan? And then measuring if those goals are really getting achieved on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, and then communicating the results being tracked. And then finally, celebrating results. And this framework is really the core of the book. And the chapter you were talking about is really taking those goals and finding a system, a tracking system that can state the strategic goal. I want to be prospering in the next 3 years and having about this income level, and then breaking it down into, okay, what gets done this year? And that would be a financial goal. All companies have 4 pillars. I don't care what kind of company you have. They have a financial pillar. They have a programs, products, and services pillar. So what are we offering service-wise or product-wise to our customers? They have an operational effectiveness pillar, and that's all the internal ops. And for real estate practitioners, that could be like your database and your online system, your client outreach system. And then finally, there's the external outreach, the communication, the branding. So those 4 pillars in companies, each of those pillars needs to have goals that support the pillar that supports your organization. So bringing that down to a personal level, we all have financial goals. We all have to operate our businesses, our personal lives and businesses with operational effectiveness. We have to know what we're offering product service wise as a real estate professional. And we all have to do some sort of external outreach, communication, branding. And so when you know that those are those pillars, then each of us could have a personal goal or two to support each of those 4 pillars.
It makes so much sense. And yet sometimes we don't even think to write those down, that these are the 4 core areas. And I love it because in real estate, when you think of a foundation of a house, you've got your 4 corners, you've got structural pillars that are going to support the house. And so that makes a lot of sense to realtors. You come from a real estate family. You had shared with me prior starting our show that your father was in real estate, and obviously you're in real estate also in Arizona. So you know that there's some skeptics out there. They're like, look, I got a listing appointment today. I've got, a closing I got to go to. I've got to get yard signs up. I've got to do all this stuff. I've got to make sure my employees are doing this. I don't have time to do all this strategic planning. I got work that needs to be done, right? And so some of this may sound a little bit altruistic, or frankly, like you're wasting time sitting down, coming up with a strategic plan and taking time out of the day to do so. What happens though when you've got that hustler, that person, that solopreneur that's out there just constantly grinding and grinding and grinding, as they go months and years down the road without any strategic plan, Carol?
Right. Well, we've heard this saying that busy does not necessarily mean purposeful. And purposeful is that just that higher level, feeling that altruistically you're making a difference in this world, that you're making a difference in this world. Now, we are not always purposeful as human beings every second of the day, every moment of our lives. We have tasks we have to do. We have certain basic things that just are routine. But when our lives are just filled with these small rocks, these little things, and there's not the big rocks identified, then life gets to be very stressful and wearing. It wears us down. And so to take the time when we can find some quiet time, it could be on the weekend, it could be on Sunday night, to review our own personal plan. It can be as simple as not only those 4 pillars, but on a personal level, I add personal things like spiritual wellness, physical wellness, friendships. So I actually have more than just the 4 pillars for my own personal. The 4 pillars are more for the main pillars that hold up an organization. But personally, I add in a few more so that there is that robust, comprehensive human element to my own personal direction.
That's such great advice, because it's true. A lot of us entrepreneurs, Sunday is really the day where it feels like the phone's not buzzing and zinging and, beeping at us. And you can really take that moment for whether it's literally a Sabbath, or you just have this personal development day where you're doing some budget planning of your own. You're doing some time planning of your own, because you can budget both money and time and make sure that you're allocating that as you look to the week forward. So great, great advice. There's some trends in chapter 7 and some models that I really just felt connected to. And I want to share these and get your feedback, because I know it's written in the book, but I think our audience will love this. Dr. Poore, are you ready?
Ready.
All right. So you shared with us in the book that there's been a shift from profit to purpose and values. We've been speaking about that a lot, so I like that. The next one was a shift from hierarchical pyramids to a network of teams. What did you find in your research about networks of teams versus kind of this hierarchy or this pyramid?
Well, the old model, and I grew up in a several decades ago corporate environment where the environment was, will tell you what you need to know when you need to know it. And it was very top down, very hierarchical, where that's a mouthful, hierarchical. I can't even say that word. But it was very driven by the CEO and the top direct reports to the CEO. The people at the entry level, they had no clue what was going on without an organization. Now I'm generalizing, but I think that was the old corporate environment that thrived, and it's still out there. But in today's environment where we have access to information and information flows freely, people want to work in a team-based environment, in an environment where they're collaborating, where they know how they're making a difference. And during this pandemic, and going forward in the future, as workforces are more and more dispersed, employees want to know how they fit in. And that's why strategic planning and making the whole team understand what our vision is, where we're going together, and how you make a difference is so important. And if employees don't find it at their workplace, they'll find other places. They'll leave and go somewhere else.
Yeah, and you mentioned that not only are we not focused on the top-down approach and that pyramid hierarchy, but you're also sharing with us, which I think is something that's going to really poke the bear a little bit, that we're going to be shifting from direct or directive leadership to supportive leadership. That sounds real soft and squishy to me. Tell me more about supportive leadership and how that works.
Well, I'm really blessed to be a part of a very vibrant brokerage in Phoenix, Brokers Hub Realty. And our designated broker is very inspirational. And we meet together weekly. We have a topic. We have, learning opportunities, professional, continuing education opportunities. And it's just a whole lot of fun. Um, and we get to know each other as individuals, as different brokers. And we're all so different. There are some that are specialists in historic properties. Others are other types of properties. So we learn from each other. And that kind of motivation helps us understand where are we going as a brokerage? How can we help each other? I've received some of the best advice on expert inspectors for new builds, for example, where I didn't have the expertise in new builds, but my first experience with it, I had an amazing inspector that came in pre-wall and then during the process and then after. And I'm telling you, it saved my clients $30,000 to $40,000 in mistakes that they wouldn't have known even how to look for. So, to be involved with a learning circle is so critical when it comes to this motivation and where we're going as a team. So I think the learning component, that we can learn together. None of us know all of the answers. That's a new model. In the old model was you just listen to your boss. The boss comes up with the plan and everybody goes, okay, we're in step with that. But today, knowledge is so available that there's so many ways we can learn things, and it's a very fluid environment. So I think it's really exciting.
I agree with you. And I think one of my favorite thought leaders in the real estate space is a good friend of mine and someone I've met with multiple times and has been on several podcasts. His sort of motto, credo within his own organization, it's a big organization in Washington, D.C., is think big, act small. And I can see that in this shift that you just alluded to from centralized authority to distributed authority, where really it's like, hey, you're going to not get a job description here. You're going to have talents and mastery, which is the next point. And you're going to be supported, but we also expect you to come in and work with a brain. And we expect you to not say, hey boss, what's next? I don't, this isn't on my KRA, or this isn't on my point by point by point. Like I don't have, a 25-page dossier here that says exactly how I'm supposed to do work today. What am I supposed to do? It's like, no, you're going to have a framework and we're going to support you, but we also want you to bring your intelligence to work every day, and bring it, baby.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we will see change forever is this opportunity to get people together on Zoom and do hybrid, where there's some people sitting in a room and others that are on the screen. And this collective seeing everybody in the same size boxes. There's nobody in a huge box and everybody else is in a tiny box. Oh no, we are side by side as a team. And that, I think, goes a long way in humanizing us, that we are all human beings and we can all be leaders. We all have a voice and we should use that voice appropriately to contribute to the strategic direction or the good of the whole. So I think this idea of showing up, and how do we show up on Zoom, and it really is an equalizer. It puts people at parity, being able to have an opportunity to have a voice, to show up, and everybody is on a screen in the same size box. Isn't that cool?
It's really cool. And this is a shout out to our podcast producer, Ann Russell. Ann's favorite chapter, the one that she zeroed in, and it's the first time I've interviewed an author that has spoken in their book about COVID-19. So how cool, very farm to table, fresh content here. We're, depending on where you are in the country, depending on when you're listening to this, this is going to be very relevant to you, that COVID has changed everything, is one of the things that Ann noted. And that in the book, she really appreciated that in Zoom, we are all equal. We have the same exact equal space. And that's not normal. We used to have this sage on a stage approach, and now it's the guide on the side. So let's talk about a little bit about that, what that mentality, that framework is, as you're communicating as a leader to an organization, but we all have the same space on Zoom.
Right. Well, it's certainly a newer part of our culture. And I think that we've seen a lot of articles during the pandemic about how can we be encouraging, how can we nurture, how can we be mentors rather than just tell people what to do. And so I think these are leadership skills that are grown over time. I don't want any of our listeners to feel worried that they're not this kind of person now, but we can all grow. I'm still learning and growing after a big corporate, higher education, nonprofit, and consulting career. I'm still learning about how I can be a better leader and how I can get past my own barriers or beliefs or constraints and not be all about me, but try to be a better listener, try to be a better encourager. I do think there's a lot about listening and asking the right questions. So, the sage on the stage is all about talk, 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 just vomit out everything that's on your mind, and you can just put that burden on your listener. And we all like to talk, okay? I like to talk. So I'm talking about me here. We is me right now, okay? But I think that the skill of listening and asking questions that are almost coach-like, that are helping the person think about it and make their own decision rather than tell this is what you have to do. So I think those are some new skills that all of us can continually grow in, and it's not an overnight process. And I don't think it's ever ending either.
Well, and Zoom is the way that we've done this podcast from episode 1 to over episode 160. So I wasn't new to it. I was prepared for it, but a lot of people, that's a very new thing for them. And you share some great advice. The thing that I like also is that you share in your book openly, and Anne really picked up this as our podcast producer. She highlighted that some work does not belong on Zoom. So let's talk about that. And as someone who's done a lot of research, has written 2 books, Dr. Poore, what type of work doesn't belong on Zoom?
I think the deeper dive conversations that we might need to have with a colleague, or some drill down work that needs to be done offline in small groups, I think that can be very difficult to try to handle in a big Zoom meeting. And so that's an example. I also think that the way we structure our meetings is different. So I'm doing strategic planning. I'm also a realtor, and I focus on very specific 2 or 3 clients at a time. I am not trying to build a large brokerage at this point in my career. I am so happy to work with 2 or 3 people where I can make a difference in their lives and help them with their real estate projects, with emphasis on sellers, by the way. But I also take on 1 or 2 strategic planning projects, and I teach a course this semester at ASU. And I dovetail those because I've got kids, I'm an empty nester, and I have more time where I can really be organized and do that. Going back to how I conduct strategic planning these days, because since a lot of it's virtual, is that I break the meetings to like a 90-minute session. And I may have 4 or 5 meetings that I'm bringing in panels, and that's the first session. Then I'm having homework groups do trend analysis and share what they found. That's the second session. The third session might be the goal setting session. And so I'm finding that Zoom is requiring shorter, more well thought out, planned, facilitative sessions rather than do it in 8 hours. There's no way you're going to sit in front of a screen and be engaged for 8 hours. So those are a few ideas. But I think when it comes to private conversations or personal things that are just would be embarrassing to vet in front of a group of people, obviously that's where you want to take it offline, as well as deeper dive analysis that is just too much to bring to a big group.
It's great reminders about the benefits of new technology. And also, let's not forget that some of the things that we need to do need to be in a different forum, a different medium. Well, Dr. Carol Poore, Strategic Impact, published by Greenleaf Book Group. We've got this great giveaway. We're so excited. We're in this theme here of several weeks in a row of Greenleaf Book Group authors that we're giving away books. And so obviously, I'd love for people to go and buy the book. What's the best way that you would like for them to go buy the book?
Well, let me say first that Greenleaf has partnered with Fast Company Press. And so Fast Company Press is actually the press, but the Greenleaf Book Group was the publishing group that I worked with, and then they collaborated with Fast Company. So I do want to give out a shout out to Fast Company Press, which is the press arm of Fast Company Magazine, which we all know and love. It's been around for about 30 years. So people can go online to buy Strategic Impact, and the full title is Strategic Impact, a Leader's 3-Step Framework for the Customized Vital Strategic Plan. And it's out online on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can buy it through your own local bookstores, and they can order it online for you if you want to shop local. And it's just out there. And I would be so happy for people to pick up a book, and feel free to share it with their friends.
And if you're thrifty, we have a handful of these books that we're going to give out to our Calibrate audience. So here's how you get it if you want to get one of the books. Instagram, info@calibrate.re. Send us a screenshot of you sending this podcast out or doing a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Just do a screenshot of that and email to us at info@calibrate.re. Obviously, if you would love to do that on Instagram, we will be checking out for those. We'll get your contact information and we'll mail you a book right away. This episode is going to be launching here in just a few days, and we want you to get these books. We're super excited for Carol to be doing her second book here with Fast Company Press, and by way of Greenleaf Book Group. All right, Carol, as we end our show, I've got 3 questions for you, kind of rapid fire, but these are deep questions. You ready for them?
Ready.
All right. Well, we've spoken at length about one of your trends here of shifting from predict and plan to experiment and adapt. And that's the heart of Calibrate Real Estate. Calibrate is all about an iterative approach. The definition of Calibrate is to adjust with experimental results, taking external factors into account or allowing comparison with other data. It's all about experiment and adapt. So what are you doing on a daily basis, maybe one of your hacks or your rhythms or your routines that makes you calibrate on a daily basis?
Great question. I like to start my mornings with coffee and prayer and, maybe a Bible verse. That's just me. And it gets my mind focused on that there's a bigger power than just myself, and that there's a grand plan out there that is bigger than my own plan for myself. So that inspires me. I also try to get to the gym every day. I'm so blessed to have a gym right in the place where I live in downtown Phoenix. And then I would say third, I serve on a number of boards that are very purposeful for me. And these boards are opportunities to learn about, like I'm on a hospital board. So learn about some other industries, and it helps me learn and grow beyond what I know today. So those are just a few of my own personal best practices.
Those are great. We are kindred spirits. I feel very similar with all the different things that you do to set your day up right. Well, you're an author, 2-time author. You're a mom of 2 sons. You teach a course at Arizona State University. I imagine you interact with a lot of 20-somethings. And my next question that I ask all of our guests is the advice you wish you knew when you were 22. It actually comes from a song that I quite enjoy called Dear Younger Me. And that song is all about writing a letter to yourself. Now that you've lived some life, if you could provide some advice to yourself when you're in your 20s, write that letter, what would the advice that you would share with the younger Carol?
I think, Kyle, 2 things. First, I would probably remind myself more frequently that you have a voice and you don't want to lose it. You want to build on your voice and not to be afraid to share opinions and understand how you feel about things so that you can have a voice about things. And I'm not just saying vocalize everything that's on your mind. I'm talking about things that are really important to make sure you don't lose your voice and that you don't discount yourself if you're young versus somebody else that you think, oh, they're intimidating. They have much more experience than I do. No, you have a voice. And I would say the other one would be to take care of yourself physically. The worst time period in my life physically was when I was working a job that I was working until almost midnight every night. And I had to, because I had so much very deep responsibilities. And I'm not going to say where it was and what and all that. but I really didn't exercise, and I felt like I was in the worst shape. It took me about 4 or 5 years to recover from that job, to be quite frank. So taking good care of yourself, I think, is another thing that I would tell my younger me. And don't take it for granted when you're in your 30s or your 40s. Just don't let yourself slip. Keep it up.
Isn't that amazing advice? And so sad. A lot of us go through these periods or these seasons of life where your work is all encompassing, and it's the thing that is your purpose, and it's your vocation, and you love it. And yet I think at times it almost kills you. You think about this work until you fall asleep at the desk. And we're in an era now, an information technological era, where work never escapes us. We have our phones, we've got our computers at home, and a lot of people are promoting post-pandemic, work from home, and there's some reasons for that. So it's great advice to just take a step back and make sure that you're centering yourself physically so that you can be the best person professionally.
Yeah, yeah. And Kyle, I'll just say this. I don't think that there is such a thing as perfect work-life balance. I think we ebb and flow, to be quite frank, be quite authentic and honest. I almost pulled an all-nighter last night, and I haven't done that in a long time, but I have a huge project coming up. And, I think that we all face that, and we can't feel guilty about that, but we do have to realize when things are so unbalanced and that we're not well, or we're not taking care of ourselves. And so I don't think that it's a myth to say that there's a perfect work-life balance. I think we ebb and we flow as projects come along, but I think if we can keep ourselves even keeled as much as possible and not lose sight of our wellness, that is so important.
It's a great point, Dr. Poore, and it's a follow-up question. We weren't really planning for this, but as you say that, it reminds me of listening to a podcast interview of an author that I really like and respect named Brendon Burchard, who wrote High Performance Habits. And Brendon said that there are times throughout the day that you can notice that you get short, you get snappy, you get snarly, you get whatever. And he's like, those are the moments where I've got to remember, I've got to go through this little ritual of really stepping back from that. When do you notice that, when it's time to, whether it's a season of life where you're like, I've been pulling some all-nighters, what are those things that you really self-reflect and evaluate, Carol, where you say, okay, it's time to probably take a little bit of a step back. I'm probably, I'm going at 6,000 RPMs right now, and I need to kind of motor it down a little bit.
Yeah, good, great. One is I start thinking the worst of people. And that would be another thing I would say to my younger self. Always try to think the best of people. I grew up in a corporate culture where you were analyzed and scrutinized, and you weren't looking at other people to be the best. You were looking for mistakes so that you didn't make a mistake as a leader. That's old school. I find that if I'm off balance, I start getting grouchy, like you said, and kind of snarly, and I'll start thinking the worst of people. I'll think they're not delivering because they're lazy or whatever. It's just terrible. And so I have to just say, pull back, time to take care of myself. And the other big indicator for me is that my house gets to be a mess. I'm not hanging up my clothes. I'm throwing them down on the chair. There's dishes. So, I'm human, right? We all have these times where we know we have got to take a pause, and we've got to get our lives together so that we can be our best self. So those are just a few little indicators for me.
I love that authenticity. I really appreciate it, because it is very humbling to share the dark side, right? The dirty side. Because every one of us, if you've produced anything, if you've pushed a rock or a boulder up the hill, you know that you've sacrificed some things that all of a sudden you look around and you're like, this place is a pit. It stinks. The dishes are piling up, or my car's a wreck or whatever, or I'm just snapping at people on the phone. So I appreciate you sharing that. Last question, and this is deeply personal to me, deeply personal to our podcast audience. The answer to the question I just asked you, the Dear Younger Me question, of my career coach, a guy named Chris Oakley, who was on episode 5 of our show, was Chris was in this mentoring group, and in his 20s, the leader of the mentoring group said, guys, let's read a book called The Principle of the Path by Andy Stanley. And that book encouraged the audience, or the reader, and Chris was in this group, to actually write their own obituary. And Chris lived on mission for the next decade from going through that experience of writing his own obituary. Chris tragically passed away 2 years ago. And it's something that has really, it's affected me, but I was also very blessed to have known him when I did. And he actually helped us with our mission statement here at Calibrate Real Estate, which is we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. So as a tribute to Chris, I asked this question: what do you want your legacy to be? And Carol, this is a question you actually ask in your book. How would you like to be remembered many years from now by those who knew you?
Well, my deepest sympathy in the loss of a dear friend. And I would say that the title of this book became, when I finally landed on the title, The Strategic Impact is the main title. That really goes along with how I look at myself in leaving a legacy. I hope my life has left a legacy of strategic impact in encouraging others to be the best they can be. And that includes my two sons, Justin and Nathan, and anyone that I come in contact with. I want to leave a legacy of strategic impact, and that impact will be encouragement and to believe the best in people.
Carol, I say this to every one of our guests. I'm so sad to see our time end. We always have these mountaintop experiences, especially with authors. You've done such deep research to get to the point of writing 2 books. Congrats to you. Over my shoulder, strategic impact. Make sure to rate, subscribe, review, especially on Apple Podcasts and Instagram. Send an email to info@calibrate.re.com if you want a copy of the book. As we close our show, Dr. Poore, this is a shout out to our podcast producer, Ann Russell, who we had chatted about. Ann is a huge Brene Brown fan. And at the end of the book, and on page 206, you quote Brene Brown. And I think it's a fitting way to end our show. We desperately need more leaders who are committed to courageous, wholehearted leadership and who are self-aware enough to lead from their hearts rather than unevolved leaders who lead from hurt and fear. And I think it's a great way to close our show. So excited, very proud of you that you've written this second book. And I can't wait for people to have this book in their hands. Dr. Carol Poore, thank you for being a part of our show. Thank you to Ann Russell for booking the show. Thank you, of course, to Greenleaf Book Group and to Fast Company Press. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati. And as I love to say, we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody.